Okay, I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to move left, right inside of Gamemaker Studio 2. So far, I've already created the main player, and I've set the sprite to object to create a create and a step event. So, for the player to move left and right, you need input from the player so it can output onto what you're looking at in the game. Because of course the player has to press something for something to happen. And that's always going to be the case for everything, really. Something has to happen and then something else happens. But first, what we want to do is we want to go to create event and we want to set a movement speed variable. For now, I'm just going to set it to 2. And I'm going to leave it as that, and I'll come back to that. But do that for the start. Now, for movement in the step event, it'll capture the player input for every single frame. So imagine that, like in real life, time is constant, it's always. But in a game, it might be 60 times a second is when time occurs, and stuff is changed during that time. So, in the step event, you want to capture the player input. So you want to get another variable called var horizontal direction. And what that variable that I'm setting to something else in a little bit does is just checks. What it's going to do is it's going to check where you're facing. That's all it does. Or where you're going to go, more like. But to check where we're going to go, we're going to have to look, well, where the player is inputting. So if the player wants to go right, well, you want to go right, in a horizontal direction, it's going to end up doing right. But how are we going to save that, and how is that going to be shown, is what we're going to do right here. So, to do that, you need to use keyboard check, if I can type it right, key, I'll put these parentheses, and do vk right. Then, you're going to do minus that by the same thing, but this time I want to do vk left. Okay, so you might be wondering, what is vk right, what is vk left, what the hell is a keyboard check? But really, keyboard check, it checks the key on the keyboard. It checks, is that key pushed? Was it pressed? Is it being pushed? Let's see. So vk right, so basically it's saying if this key, vk right, is being pressed, and vk right is the right arrow key. So if the right arrow key is being pressed, this is true. So that means, yep, it's true. We'll come back to that. And then you're minusing it. So you're minusing the true minus the same thing, but for the left arrow key. Now, this might not make a lot of sense, but it really is very clever. I struggled a little when I first learned it a while ago, but I'll explain to you now. Basically, let's say, imagine that you want to imagine all the scenarios to really think it through so that you understand it. That's how a lot of coding works. But let's say you have the right arrow key down and that you don't have the left arrow key down. Well, it's going to be right, true, minus false. I want you to imagine that true is 1 and false is equal to 0. So if your right key is down, it will be 1 minus 0, 1. And 1 in this code would mean right. So for this, 1 is equal to right, 0 is equal to nothing, and negative 1 is equal to left for the next piece of code. So, keyboard check, vk right, if that's pressed and the left one isn't, it means right. Now let's say VK right, the right key isn't pressed, and the left key isn't pressed also. 0 minus 0. 0, nothing. Now let's say right is pressed, and the left is pressed. Well, that's going to be 1 minus 1, which is 0, nothing. Which would make it that if both keys are pressed, the player won't move, which you might want to do, you might not want to do, but yeah, code mean change, of course. Now let's say the right key isn't pressed, so 0, and the left key is pressed, 1. 0 minus 1 equals negative 1, which would be left. So really there's 4 total scenarios. Both keys are pressed, no keys are pressed, the right key is pressed only, and the left key is pressed only, which will make these 3 different values come out of this and be stored inside of this variable horizontal direction. Now the reason they're stored in 1s, 0s, and negative 1s, so that's just how it is. True usually values to 1, and false to negative 1. But what we're actually going to use this is when we're actually, changing our position, the most important part. I mean, we can write whatever we want here, but if we don't apply it to their world, this is just a thought behind it. It's not actual execution of the idea. So to execute it, we want to put x, which is the position of our character on the x-axis. Think of like a coordinate grid. So we want to increase our x, or minus our x, or have nothing happen to it. So we want our x to equal x, again, plus that horizontal direction and here comes back the movement speed times the movement speed. Okay? Now, this might seem a little complicated, and there's different ways to write it. You might see it like this, which means the exact same thing. Basically, we're taking the current x value and we're adding this equation right here. Okay? So, remember this. So, if we're going right, that's the way we're facing, it'll get times by the movement speed, which is 2. Now, you might be wondering what 2 really means. It means that for every step, every frame that we might be putting right or left, it's going to be times by 2 pixels. We're going to move 2 pixels. Because if we're going right, horizontal direction is going to be 1, and movement speed will be 2, because that's the way we set it. And it's going to be added to the x, and x value on the coordinate grid is going to change upwards. If it's 0, it's going to be 0 times 2, which is 0, and negative 1, which would be negative 1 times 2, which would be negative 2, so we're going to move negative 2 pixels back, right, 2 pixels forward, 0, 0 pixels anywhere. And that's really the basics of it, but a big thing about Gamemaker Studio 2 is that you kind of want to add these things like this, variables like these, movement speed. I could have gotten away without this, and the code would still work. But it would suck. We'd be moving way too slow. So if I add it back in, now I'm able to move, instead of 1 pixel, if that's actually how it would be, that's slow, very, very slow. I would be able to move however fast I wanted to. And I can change it very, very easily just by going in here and changing this number. If I want to be super fast, I don't know, 200. That's way too fast. Go to like 20 if you want. But let's just say movement speed 10. And now I'm going to enter the game, and I'm going to show you what this code will do. Now you can move left and right with the arrow keys.